Today I'm reviewing this elevated raised bed from Vego Gardening. I've assembled it, checked it out top to bottom, and I'm here to share my honest first impressions, from build quality to the company ethics, and to who this raised bed can really benefit. This elevated raised bed was gifted to me by the company for review. However, I did not sign anything agreeing to give them a positive review, so you can rest assured that all these thoughts are actually my own. So this is going to be a full setup and design review, but it is not going to include a review of the usage. I am going to update you on that in the future. However, this elevated bed is going to be going to my friend's house into her garden, and because she just bought a house, woohoo, she is moving soon, and so we are going to hold off on filling it until she is all settled. So an elevated raised bed is going to work a lot like a standard raised bed with a few exceptions. So because it's elevated off the ground, that's going to create a few pros and cons compared to a standard raised bed. So starting on the pros side, it is going to be good for patios. It's going to be good for renters who can't necessarily mess up their yard. And because it is elevated, it's also going to be great for anybody with mobility issues, specifically the bending over to work in the garden or the kneeling down to get closer to the ground. So on the con side, it is raised up off the ground pretty decently. And when you're looking at whether or not a plant is going to survive a mild freeze, how high above the ground it is can play a factor in the microclimate and how cold it gets. Usually plants that are closer to the ground are going to benefit from the radiated heat from the earth, and plants that are higher up are just going to be just a little bit more chilly, especially because they're generally a little bit more exposed to wind. So if you're in an area where you're concerned about a couple of degrees here and there making the difference between your plant surviving a freeze and not, then this might actually make that issue just a little bit worse. Additionally, your plants are not going to be able to get their roots any deeper into the ground. And to be fair, most plants that you're going to put in a raised garden bed are not going to be needing more than the 12 inches that this provides. However, this is not going to be a great solution for more perennial plants that really do like to be able to spread their roots out pretty deep. This elevated bed that I'm reviewing today is the 2-foot by 8-foot option. It holds 15 cubic feet of soil, and it can support up to 1,400 pounds of weight. The overall height is about 32 inches, so that is going to hit most people about waist height. And like I said before, it is 12 inches of that is planting depth. It's made out of the same material that Vego uses for all of its raised beds. They call it the VZ 2.0, but really all that is, it is a galvanized steel, and then that steel is coated in a zinc, magnesium, aluminum alloy. And then on top of that, it is painted with a USDA certified non-toxic paint. And then all of that together is going to make this raised elevated bed very corrosion resistant. All of the raised beds from Vego Gardening are rated to last at least 20 years, if not more. And before we get too far into this specific product, I do want to zoom out for a moment and talk about Vego Gardening as a company, because for me, how the company operates is always an important part of making that buying decision. So Vego, I have found to be pretty impressive in this area, to be honest. They were founded with a mission to make gardening more accessible and sustainable. They also do make a lot of donations towards educational purposes. They are donating about 1 raised bed per every 50 that they sell. And they also do have a specific kids program where they donate raised beds to community efforts to educate children about gardening. I also love that everything they do is about increasing the longevity of their product. In today's day and age, you find a lot of stuff that is designed to fail so that you have to buy it more often. And Vego Gardening is taking steps to make sure that once you buy a raised bed from them, you're not going to need to rebuy it again in 5 years. You're going to be able to keep using that same raised bed, and it's going to be in really good condition for at least 20 years, if not more. And I just find that to be really impressive. All right, let's dive into the actual nitty-gritty of this specific elevated raised bed. Vego's really good about providing you everything you need to assemble their raised beds on site. The only thing that you need to already have is going to be a Phillips head screwdriver. I think also after going through the process of setting up this raised bed with my friend Krista, having 2 people is maybe not required, but it certainly is quite helpful. And something that I noticed as we were putting it together is if you are somebody who is buying this for mobility issues, I think you might struggle to put this together yourself. I think you would need to plan to have somebody available to put it together for you, because you can see we are bending over quite a lot. We are lifting. It's not heavy per se, but definitely you kind of have to hold things at awkward angles long enough to get things screwed together. I will say the written instructions could have been a bit more clear. Krista and I definitely spent about 10 minutes on a particular instruction trying to figure out exactly what they meant. There was a little bit of a labeling overlap of some of the parts, and it took us a moment to figure out that that's what was going on. Now, Vego does provide a tutorial video to help you put this together, but I personally think that the written instructions alone should be enough. And the video, it was there for the support when we needed it, but I don't think that we should have needed it. So this is an area they could definitely improve upon. I think design is always going to be one of Vego Garden's strong suits. I've put together other raised beds from them before, and I've always found that the design, it just makes sense. I think it's really excellent. And I know that this does come with some of the standard Vego features that you would be used to seeing. Of course, there is the rubber edging that goes all the way around the top that makes sure that there are no sharp edges that you could possibly cut yourself on. And they also use cap nuts over the bolts that are closer to the top of the raised bed. So there's never going to be an exposed bolt that you could reach into your raised bed and accidentally scratch yourself on. Something else I want to point out about the design is that the nuts and bolts did go together pretty well. There's only like 1 or 2 that I really struggled with. And I think this is worth pointing out because I can't tell you how many different things I've ordered that like you have to put together, and then the threads on the bolts don't really go with the nuts, and you feel like you have to spend forever getting it to properly thread on there. And I felt like the bolts and nuts they gave us were really high quality, and so we didn't really have to deal with that. And as far as stability, we definitely put it through its paces a little bit. We gave it some pretty aggressive wiggles to see whether or not it was going to be unstable or top heavy. And Krista even climbed inside it to test whether or not the bottom would actually hold a good amount of weight. Of course, Krista does not weigh as much as this bed is rated for, but it did feel good that it just felt really solid underneath her. And, it just proved to us that it wasn't going to be flimsy and fail as soon as we started filling it with heavy soil. You can see in these bottom panels that they're wavy, but they're not just wavy. They're wavy in a trapezoidal way with those sharp corners. And this is actually stronger even than it would be if it was flat, and stronger than it would be if it was just simply curvy wavy. And so you can tell that Vego thought about this pretty hard and made a really good decision on the stability in this area. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to know about how it's going to operate in use, you can leave those questions in the comments. And when I do eventually do an update video on this, I'll make sure to address all of that. And if you do want to catch that, make sure that you subscribe. So if you're watching this video as part of some larger research on what type of raised bed you're going to want in your garden this year, I do highly recommend you check out my video where I compare 4 different companies and their metal raised beds that are all incredibly similar, it turns out, with some key differences. So I will link that up here and down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I wish you all happy gardening.